Hi, I'm Britton LaRue, and this is Moon to Moon. Moon to Moon is a space to consider, celebrate, and share the ways we come home to ourselves, anchor through change, and uncover our power. 1 month, one phase, one loving step at a time. Welcome back, Moon to Moon. I am so proud to be sharing this next installment of the Unshaming the Houses series. Many of you have been listening to them all. Many of you may have found Moon to Moon because you discovered one of the previous Unshaming the Houses episodes, or maybe this one. I'm delighted that you found your way here. Welcome. The idea with the Unshaming the Houses series is that with each of these 12 episodes, I'm exploring shame in one house of the chart of astrology, which is a domain of life. It's a department of humaning in the terrestrial experience. And for each of these episodes, I've been inviting another astrologer to come talk about that house and how we see shame alive in that house. And so there are common threads through every episode, and yet, as you may be seeing, they're all quite different because the house itself has its own frequency that we drop into, and also each conversation's with a different human being, so it's going to be very unique. Everyone I've invited is someone that I have a personal relationship with of some kind. So there's, in all of these, a level of connection that's already there. And that's certainly the case with this episode dedicated to the 8th house. This is an episode where I've invited one of my previous students turned collaborators to come and spend time with me and share their genius. And Mariola Rosario is one of those humans that I've known the longest in my life as a professional astrologer. She's been with me inside of many different containers that I've held, holding one role or another. She's someone who's held space for me. Mariola is a human that I deeply, deeply, deeply respect. You will see, if you don't know Mariola yet, what I mean there, because she's so wise, so poetic, deeply, deeply, I was going to say deeply hearted, as in big hearted, as in the heart. She's deeply hearted. Yeah, and she feels things deeply. That's the deeply hearted. And that's, in many ways, an aspect of her beautiful Scorpionic chart. Mariola is a Scorpio rising, Scorpio sun, Scorpio Mercury, Pluto Scorpio generation. There's an enormous Scorpionic invitation to her chart. And we have always had an affinity for loving to talk about the monstrous, the macabre, the underworld. Mariola was one of the co-facilitators of the first cave space called Notes from the Underground, 2021. Also contributed to Cave Space 2022, is currently the TA in Emergence Astrology Year 1, was 13th Reader Magician's Table 2022, 2022, and big announcement is one of the faculty members for Emergence Astrology Year 2. I'll do a larger formal announcement where I will share the other faculty members for Emergence Astrology Year 2 at a future episode. But for now, I'll share that Mariola, I'm so proud to say, has said yes to my invitation to be on that faculty. Let me read Mariola's bio. Mariola Rosario is a visual artist, astrologer, educator, independent researcher, and flaneuse, weaving occult traditions and visual culture. She is from Puerto Rico and currently lives and creates from Paris, France. She has always found herself somewhere between the teacher-student axis and would like to continue to find alternative and more compassionate routes toward inclusive pedagogy and anti-extractive modes of learning and co-creating spaces of magical and material mutual aid. Mariola's books are open for one-on-one astrology and tarot consultations. She's also open to creative collaborations with fellow artists, magicians, organizers, activists, and curious souls. Mariola also organizes bespoke tours in Paris for anyone that is interested in art, history, culture, especially as it relates to occult traditions and the more hidden alternative parts of the city. She also offers wine, coffee, and culinary explorations for food nerds like herself. Contact her if you are interested. She knows all the good spots. MariolaRosario.com. You can get these links in the show notes. Her course, Chthonic AF, Unearthing Myths of Power, Sacred Rage, and the Monstrous Feminine, begins late October and goes until November 20th. Please contact Mariola if you would like to join, even if the course has already started. P.S. I'm in the class. This upcoming spring, during Gemini season, Mariola will co-host 2 dreamy astrology, yoga, relaxation, and culinary delights retreats in Greece with friend and collaborator Megan Fry. There will be 2 sessions, one under the introspective new moon in Gemini and the other illuminated by the expansive full moon in Sagittarius. More info here. That's at holisticsoulproject.com. And the link is in the show notes. I also have Mariola's Instagram link so that you can follow her there. So we go really deep here. Like really, really deep. I mean, I knew we were going to. We've had hundreds of hours of conversation by this point now, Mariola and me. And that's just the beauty of these kinds of conversations with those that you have this kind of soul kinship with, walking together over years, watching each other's lives change and shift as we each change and honor one another's emergence and transformations over time. And we both hold a lot of things to be sacred, and the 8th house illuminates a lot of these things. A lot of these topics are those that we don't really, as humans, have over lunch. You know, we don't openly discuss a lot of the things that we get into here. That this is the nature of the 8th house. And it was important to me to invite someone on who not only I knew would be comfortable exploring these realms with me, but fiercely compassionate and in awe of all that the 8th house represents. Someone who can hold the light of to illuminate this strange beauty of the 8th house, the gift of the 8th house, the treasure of the 8th house, which is often spoken of in ways that just activate more fear and shame around it. So thank you, Mariola, for being that person I could go there with. And thank you, listener. I look forward to hearing how this one lands for you. Please reach out to us to share. Enjoy. Oh, before you hear us in our conversation, there's going to be a little reading at the front end of Mariola wanted to share this snippet with you. It's just a few minutes. It's a quote from Dion Fortune's The Sea Priestess to really draw us into the space. So you'll hear that first after the musical interlude, and then it will immediately flow into our conversation. And then I'll have an outro at the end, so I'll see you there. Cheers.
Hi, this is Mariola, and I would like to read some words for you as an entry point, as an introduction into this episode on the 8th house in astrology. As you will hear us reference several times during the episode, the 8th house has this quality of ineffability. There's kind of a wordlessness and often a difficulty with seeing this house and entering this house. And I think that one of the entry points, one of the keys into this mysterious realm is through ritual. So let me read these words for you as we prepare to sink down into the 8th house. These words are from Dion Fortune, from the Sea Priestess. And I came into these words thanks to Demetra George, who references them often in her work. Sink down, sink down, sink deeper and more deep into eternal and primordial sleep. Sink down, be still, forget and draw apart. Sink into the inner earth's most secret heart. Drink of the waters of Persephone, the secret well beside the sacred tree. Waters of life and strength and inner light. Eternal joy drawn from the depths of the night. Then rise, made strong with life and hope renewed. Reborn from darkness and from solitude.
Welcome back to Moon, Mariola Rosario.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here again.
Yeah, again. Let's see, you've been on a few times. The
Yes.
Living the Fuck Out of Your Chart Scorpio edition is one of my most popular episodes of all time.
All right, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Of course it is.
That was like 2021, maybe?
Yeah, that's old school.
It is pretty old school. I used to do more of those. Living the fuck out of your charts. I should bring them back. They're fun.
Those are great. I love hearing those. Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming to talk about the 8th house, unshaming the 8th house.
I am honored to be talking about the 8th house. I'm a little terrified because, 8th house. Yeah, thank you for your invitation. I I'm a huge fan of this Unshaming project.
No,
Yeah.
I'm so glad.
Mhm.
Thank you. Yeah, I love to hear from you sharing photos and glimpses of the neighborhoods of Paris where you walk when you listen to certain episodes that resonate. It's just makes my heart so happy.
Thank you. I love doing that. I'm a very third house person, so I really come alive like walking around my neighborhood. It's very helpful for my I think my astrological studies, like a lot of it I've done through walking in my neighborhood and listening to audiobooks like podcasts. So much Chris Brennan on these ones. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's something about Paris too. I remember when I lived there, I would plan out an hour to get somewhere that I could totally take the metro.
Yes.
Just
Mhm.
just to feel myself walking through the space in my imagination. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, takes me
Yeah.
there. Yeah, I am since this just came in at the beginning, I'm wondering how Paris walks are going to weave their way into this conversation. I don't know, maybe
I
gargoyles, the
I
gargoyle.
have some thoughts already.
Okay.
We we are in Paris, like a very good thing to remember for those who visit Paris is that when you are walking these streets, below you are bones, the
Mm,
bones of the city. The catacombs are
mm,
all over the city. This precious, beautiful Venusian city is sitting on bones.
mm. Thank you. Yeah, here we go. Have you done
So,
the catacomb tours?
of course, yeah. I'm
Hmm.
obviously a fan. Yeah. I could talk about
Yeah.
the catacombs. We can do another episode about the
Uh,
catacombs.
okay. Remind me, wait, what is the French word for catacombs?
Catacomb.
Okay, just catacombs.
You just say it with like a beachy accent and you're good.
Yes, exactly. And you live over Père Lachaise, this famous cemetery.
That's right. Yeah. I am looking at it now through my window. It's raining. Yeah. Legendary, very old cemetery. Lots of our favorites are here. Like Jim Morrison is a neighbor of mine. Um, he says hello.
Amazing.
Yeah, others. Edith Piaf. Yeah, many wonderful artists are here near me.
All right.
Mhm.
So, for those who are just learning about the eighth house, you may not realize we've been referencing eighth house topics. So, I would love it if you would bring us into the vocabulary. How do you, if you're sitting with someone who you're going to talk about their eighth house, how do you begin to bring bring someone in?
Mhm. I have to say that for me, the eighth house is one of the more difficult houses to talk about. Um, in general and also in the context of a reading, I think it's very hard for me to just go straight to the eighth house. For example,
Mm,
there's a sun in the eighth house. Like for me, it's kind of like you have to ease into it. And yeah, I'm thinking about what you've been doing here, which is like unshaming all the houses, like going chronologically, like first house and now in this journey, we've landed in the eighth house, like this unshaming, like you've been unshaming first house, second house, all this unshaming to land in the eighth house. You know, it's like the house of shame, maybe.
mm, mm.
Like it's definitely in the framework of shame and unshaming. I think it's a super hot zone.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of the topics that are attributed or that live inside of this house are topics that are in general difficult to talk about, like death is like maybe the number one thing. Um, money, shared resources, inheritance, taxes. Like no one wants to talk about taxes, not even the taxman, you know? It's like who likes to talk about this? Um, and so these things like they bring stuff up. Um, and I think they're all also related to intimacy in a way. Like the topics of the eighth house have a lot to do with the previous house, which is the seventh house. In many ways, like we're continuing with the work that we started in the seventh house. In the eighth house, we take those topics, like relationships, and we go deep. Like, let's see. Okay, you want to be with this person? Let's see. Let's merge. Let's
Yeah.
merge those bank accounts and see how that feels. Um, so there's a lot of trust, I think, and a lot of surrender that's required with eighth house topics, which is why it's not always easy to just like start talking about the eighth house with someone like, you know, without any context first. Yeah.
Right. Yes, the context of the whole chart.
Yeah, yeah, because it can be it's can be a little scary, right? Like all these topics sound hardcore. Now, we're gonna break them down in this episode and we're gonna get into it. But there is like a slight um fear, I think, when it comes to the eighth house. Um, especially if you're on your own, just like researching the eighth house, like the things that you're gonna find are maybe gonna spook you a bit.
It is spooky.
It's spooky in the eighth house.
Yeah, and I was talking about this with Erin Kelly, who I'm doing the sixth house one with. I've already had that conversation, but it's not out for you to hear yet. But we
Mhm.
address how the sixth house is known as one of the quote unquote bad houses, which
Yes.
is all talk about shame language, eighth
Mhm.
houses as well. And my daughters, their son primary placements are one is in the sixth and the other has a huge stack in the eighth. And here I am, an astrologer dedicated to unshaming. Here I am, someone who is interested in celebrating the power in any chart. And when I read about the eighth house, same with the sixth house, from just the context of being a mother, I feel like that clenching in my body and in my throat with fear for like what does this mean for her? You know,
Mhm.
it does do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm. And yet, you know, we know a lot of people with the sun in the
Oh
eighth house
yeah.
and many, many other placements, not just the sun. The sun is like the first thing I think about just because there's this almost like incoherence to like having the sun here, right? Like having the sun in sort of the darkest, dampest place in the chart. Um, but there's also something incredibly beautiful, right? To have the heat and the light and sort of the drying quality also of the sun in this like otherwise kind of humid and um putrid place. I'm saying these things like putrid and whatnot, but I have to say that I'm not like, I don't say it with shame. Like, I like these things. Like, I like
Yes.
the putrefaction. I like places where mushrooms may grow, right? I
Yes.
think the eighth house is perhaps one of these places. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And that's
Mhm.
really why I was hoping you would say yes to this is I know that you find beauty in, the upturned rock with whatever kind of interesting life forms have made their home there, And
Yes.
I think from an unshaming perspective, it's about embracing the beautiful in all of human experience and all of life form experience and acknowledging that it's what makes identi- identities that we attach to the eighth house difficult is the shame from this like over cultural conditioning around what we're allowed to talk about and what we're allowed to be okay with in
Mm-hmm.
the internalization of shame that can get lodged in eighth house parts of us come from just feeling like how can I bring this part of me out.
Yeah, there's this like subterranean element to the eighth house, which I think is like where shame operates, or like shame um like lodges itself or something, like a kind of parasite, like in the underneath, like we can't really see it. And the eighth house has a lot of this, but then there's always a crack, right? There's always something that happens, and then like, oof, there goes the shame. Like, and same with the eighth house, I think, like there's cracks of light. Um, there's access points, there's entry points, there's gates. It's like famously called the gate of is it Hades or hell? I always forget. Like
Hades, I think, is the opposite, the
yeah,
second house.
yeah,
But they're related, the
they're
second,
related.
these
It's like the
opposing
gate.
houses.
Yeah, the
Mhm.
two gates, um, which I like as a metaphor, no, like as an entry, like a gate into the underneath, into the underworld, like an invitation to go down and to go into your own catabasis, which is, I learned, like, like we've talked a lot about catabasis, you and I, in the past in our collaborations, but catabasis is actually one of the ancient names of the eighth house.
Mm.
And of course it is, right? Catabasis is like this action of going down, like stepping forward, um, and then underneath into the journey. Like with catabasis, you can kind of see like a path that's leading down, like some stairs, and
Yeah.
you decide to take the step down. And well, sometimes it's not a decision, right? Sometimes it's just like a push.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like the katabatic journeys from literature, from ancient Inanna through
Hmm.
Persephone to even Alice in Wonderland.
Right.
It depends. The level of choice is different depending on the story.
Hmm.
And it's just like in life that sometimes it feels like we've been abducted down. And,
Yeah.
and then other times we like bravely go in, like in Poltergeist, when the mom takes the rope around her waist and it says, "Don't let go." And she walks in to
Good.
cross the portal into this other side, which that is eighth house.
Totally. Yeah. It's the Odysseus journey too, no? Like Odysseus very famously like goes into the underworld to get some information, right? Like there's something about these places that have something to tell us, right? And it's only when we go there, either by choice or unfortunately in life, sometimes by force, um, that we can have access to these things. And like Odysseus, yeah, goes down, he has to like find some information. And so I think like this is very eighth house too. It's like, what's in there? Like, what are we really like swimming in our eighth houses? Like, what's the info? Whose voices are here, right? What are these vapors that I'm hearing? What's the
Mhm.
hissing?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And this bridges to its more modern relationship to the occult but also to like depth psychology
Mhm.
and going into these spaces where you're like normal going to the grocery store self doesn't necessarily think about it as much.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I think this is something very interesting about the eighth house is that for me, like it is the most complicated house to talk about just because it has undergone so many transformations as far as like what like how we define it and what topics we give it, from ancient astrology all the way to like now. And it's very contested, I think, in the astrological community now. Like if you're more like a modern astrologer or just like abide by the traditional ancient meanings. But yeah, this like the psychology of it, it's so fitting, but it is a very modern take. Like it's only something that was attributed to this house, I think, after the 19th century, because
Mhm.
like when psychology is invented. And I think like right around this time, there's also Neptune. Like if we want to bring in some like astrological context, like Neptune is being discovered. Um, and we're like figuring that actually like when the ancients were saying occult, which I think they were like really meaning like hidden stuff, like stuff that we cannot see, occult, literally from our like perception. And then in the modern times, we were like, oh no, like the occult, like the actual occult, the rituals, right? The craft, um, and all that comes with it, right? Which is our stuff that I think we're both interested in, such as, yeah, psychic stuff, mediumship stuff, ancestral
Mhm.
work, communicating with the dead. Like let's talk about it.
Yes.
Necromancy.
Yes.
Um, yeah, and even like things like witchcraft have been attributed to the eighth house. Again, this is very contested. Like it depends on which astrologer, I guess, you're talking to. Um, I personally think of witchcraft more like in the third house or the ninth
Yeah,
house.
I kind of feel like they could, for me, that the witchcraft could be third house for more like the daily small
Yes.
spells, and the eighth house is like the bigger stuff. The
Yeah.
deeper big rituals, that the 2 hour rituals. But I was gonna say, I do think there's a way to create a thread with the eighth house in the ancient world as tied to like a kind of like weakness of mind, or
Hmm.
because it was known as like the idol house. So if your son was there or whatever, there might be like a weakness to you in terms
Hmm.
of the way you might be conditioned to be more towards fear or like anxiety, whatever their language was for that, which is a thread to nowadays the eighth house being related to like obsessions, compulsions, fear and anxiety. And
Mm-hmm.
I, it's interesting thinking about the eighth house because so many individuals I know with sun or moon there from a very early age experienced like deep fear of death and the unknown. Like the
Mm-hmm.
sense, and you almost wonder if these little children are just so psychic, they're like actually sensing the space.
Mm-hmm.
And then the so many I've known have become adults who are actually become therapists, mediums, energy healers, actual guides to other for other humans with the mysteries. It's
Mm-hmm.
incredible. But it hasn't always been easy, like
Mm-hmm.
I do think there's something that's difficult about the eighth house because as children, there's just like not a culture for care around the experience.
Yeah, there's definitely I guess a cost to it, an exchange
Mhm.
to it.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, it is incredible. I have to agree, the amount of people that I have, that I know, that I have read for, that I'm friends with, that have prominent eighth house placements, and they are just in service to, like, in deep devotion and deep service to mystery and to walking the rest of us that are interested in these things, like holding our hand to go there with them. Yeah, they're like the psychopomps, right? Eighth house
Yes.
psychopomps. It's so beautiful. And yeah, what a thing to be in service to. I think they see it like from a young age, or they feel it, this thing like about being born psychic. Not saying that all eighth house people are psychic or anything. Well, actually, maybe. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, this thing about the idol place is very interesting too, because I like astrology, and in general, I think there's so much about it that is about like light and what we can see versus what we cannot see. It's an extremely like visual medium, astrology. Um, it has to do with like our perception. Like it begins with us looking from Earth up, right? And trying to figure out with our eyes what's going on and how does it correlate to our life. Um, but yeah, like if you can think of a birth chart and you can imagine the path of the sun, like going up from the first house and then meeting the top of the chart, right? Like at noon, it's very visible, it's very bright. And then by the time it's like descending into the eighth house and then eventually into the seventh house, this is like what we call the idle place, the idle time. It's literally like the light of the sun is dying, right?
Mhm.
In a way, right? Not to be like super dramatic, but it's almost like we could say dying, but we could also say resting. It's a resting place. Eighth
Mhm.
house is also a place where you like perhaps need to lay down,
Ooh,
uh,
yes.
right? Like be
Yeah.
horizontal,
Hmm.
be idle. And yeah, this relationship that we have in especially now in our contemporary culture to light, like to being turned on all the time to be like on working outward, uh, constantly participating. Um, this is quite adversary to the proposals of the eighth house,
Mm.
where the lights are turning off. Okay. Like the sun is setting. It's not that it's going to go away forever, but it's going to go away for a little bit so that we can see things with a different perspective, right? What happens when the light changes? There's new shadows that emerge. There's things that we couldn't see before that were actually always there, but now we have another way to look at them. If that does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. I
Yeah.
love it. And thinking of shame, like idleness
Yes.
as it relates to laziness, not productivity. I
Mm-hmm.
think that because of that, there can be this sense that we don't have time for the eighth house, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and so there's this pressure that so many of us feel like we're like holding our shit together constantly to keep it all, in so we can work, so we
Mm-hmm.
can deal with things.
Yes.
And that's when like the cracks start to come. It's like the eighth house is calling us to go take a break and be with ourselves to see what's trying to emerge into our awareness that might be like a actual ghost from the past or like a secret that is becoming too intense to keep secreting away and needs to come out into the light. Because I do think of the eighth house as like the secrets that we share with those we get really close to, whether that's the person that we're partnering with or with like a therapist,
Mm-hmm.
the secret malignant thing that the surgeon pulls out, um, I think that, if we don't pay attention to the material of the eighth house, um, it could like kill us, the stuff that we are forcing back down.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that comes up often um, when we allow the space for the eighth house is grief. Like
Oh,
it just that like it comes out. That's one of the biggest things, and it ties very well with shame because
yeah.
um I think many of us carry grief and we stuff it, we hide it, we don't even know it's there, and then it comes up, right? And often it comes up when we are actually like trying to rest or in the idle
Yes.
place,
In the
right?
idol. Oh my gosh, just yesterday I'll share that I was on a walk in the woods by my house and I stopped and there was because I saw all these butterflies animating this section of wildflowers and I just wanted to kind of zone out and just like astral project into this like field of flowers and butterflies. There was a part of my brain that was like, you don't have time for this. And it was like, no, we're just gonna just take a minute. And as just within moments of resting, I heard myself say, I miss Buddy. And Buddy's my dog that died this year. And there
Oh,
was something about the experience of like feeling what's under what's under the scene that was like so vivid in this moment. And I only had that moment because I was like, I just want to give myself a minute, you know?
the idle place.
The idle place. Yeah. it reveals.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, this reminds me of like yoga and like sometimes it's like kind of embarrassing to admit this, but some of the hardest moments like in yoga practices for me are when I have to be very still and like hold things for a really long time. And even like the last part where you're just like a corpse, you just don't have to do anything. I'm like, can I just like move really fast? Can I get this out? Um, yeah, anyway, I just had that like
It reminded you of this, yeah.
realization. Yeah,
Hmm.
like easier to be on the move than to rest sometimes. Yeah.
1000%. And
Yeah.
I think the great um the spell, the big surprise has been learning how what can come through the eighth house uh uh draperies, the veils, right? The veils is so much support for living. But it's like we're so afraid, and then we have this culture that really doesn't provide
Mhm.
a lot of ritual and ceremony for just allowing these kinds of the support to come through. Same with like traditional definitions like inheritances. I
Mhm.
think that sometimes there can be, if you inherit money, say, there can be shame that it's like, but I didn't work for this, or like, why do I get to have this? Like, it's not attached to my own efforting, you know?
Mhm. Mhm.
And the sense of like, I don't know what to do with this money because I feel guilty that I even have it. And so, like, we're just like paralyzed, unable to invest this gift from the dead
Mhm.
into our own aliveness and put it back into the ecosystem because of the shame that we don't deserve it.
Yeah, I think this is especially true in a culture that like overvalues like individualism and sort of like I mean maybe this is like actually very US centric, but this idea that like you can pull yourself up from your own bootstraps, and like that's how you do things. Like um and there's shame in that. If you don't do it like that, then there's shame. If you're not like a self-made person, there's
Mm-hmm.
shame in that. But then there's shame like no inverted, right? There's the shame of the people that inherit money or whatever resources and they're like I don't deserve this. And then there's the shame of people that don't inherit anything, right? Which is
Mm-hmm.
most people. um there's like intergenerational wealth and like whatever shame is there. And let's talk about intergenerational poverty and the shame of that and the shame of debt, which is a major
Mm-hmm.
signification of the eighth house. We live in economies that are largely based on debt, credit, debt. Um, and we shame people for having debt also.
Yes,
Yeah.
we're told to be so excited that we can go get the credit, and then we're shamed for
Mhm.
having debt.
That's right. What's up with that?
Yeah, and these are part of the secrets and the compounded shame that we're just carrying. There's going to be
Mhm.
shame like no matter what, right? Because as you're
Yeah.
saying, whether you inherit or whatever you're inheriting, it feels like it's a losing situation the way we've set this up.
Yeah, because we can't talk about it, I think.
Yes, there you go. Yeah, because we can't talk about it, and that is the great feature of shame
Right.
is silence
Yeah.
and isolation.
Yeah. But I do think I get the sense that we are collectively like unveiling a lot of this stuff. Like the stuff is coming up very eighth housey style, like it's just like cracking open um in deep and uncomfortable ways, but it is happening. And for example, with the topic of debt, right? Like student loans, like whatever, medical debt, all the debts. People are really talking about this. Like this is no longer a normal state of being. It never was. Um, but there is so much power, I think, in this, like the collective finally talking about it. I'm thinking about this community called the Dead Collective, which is like they're doing amazing work about, just the topic of student loans, especially. Yeah.
Hmm. I completely agree with you. These last 10 years, especially one thing after the next, really having the difficult conversations around collective inheritances,
Mhm.
profound.
Yes.
There's also there's the deep discomfort of feeling like a gap between so much powerful conversation, so much like catharsis feeling, and just being able to
Yeah.
talk about things with feeling the frustration of many that are not. But it feels so amazing to see what's happening when we have conversations. I mean, that I wouldn't be doing this series if I wasn't a part of this collective
Hmm.
interest in talking about things, which
Yeah.
is very eighth house.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's really like opening up the gates of hell, like when you start thinking about all the shit that we have inherited as a culture
Yeah.
and all the dismantling, which I think is a very eighth house word, um, that we are doing and that we will continue to do, hopefully, um, for forever, I guess. I don't know. I don't know when this ends, but um, yeah, so much violence, so much colonialism, so much extraction, so much destruction of our resources, like very eighth house word,
Mhm.
also coming from second eighth house, um, collective resources, shared resources.
Shared. That's the key
Oh,
word with eighth house
yeah. How
is
are we sharing the resources?
the shared part.
Yeah. Who is sharing the resources? This is not always very clear in our culture. Like who holds the resources and who has access to them? Clearly, it's not like equitable.
Yeah, and I think that the process of opening into this conversation and the unraveling here is so vulnerable because we can't do this alone,
Mhm.
and we've inherited this conditioning that we have to do it alone. So we're not used to trusting each other. We're
Mhm.
not used to the
Yeah.
vulnerability of letting ourselves be seen where we each are in our own process of unshaming and accountability for the past and lineage, the dead.
Mm-hmm.
And
Hmm.
most of us have not had like families that, well, I'll just speak for myself, guiding me to understand the choices and the actions of my ancestors and how to relate to them. So we're finding these teachers, but there they are. Like, we're living in a time where you've never had more resources to learn about trauma. Trauma is
Mm-hmm.
a big eighth house word, I would say,
Yes.
because it's lodged under.
It's lodged. It's also inherited.
Yes. And it's also very tied to life force energy. So
Mhm.
the opening, the releasing creates so much power, which ties to the eighth house idea of like diamonds and resources like lodged under that
Yeah.
have tremendous power.
Hmm. The Pluto.
The Pluto, our favorite. After Mars, maybe? I don't know.
I like both of them equally, but yeah, I think at this point where we are in like astrological history, it's very hard not to talk about Pluto and the eighth house. Like, I don't think, obviously, like traditionally, like Pluto was neither here nor there. It wasn't even like discovered until like the 20th century, but um all of these topics that you're saying, like especially now about like sort of unveiling power through like excavation, is that's Plutonian as fuck, right? That's the power of Pluto. Because there is discomfort there too. I think like that's part of like Pluto stuff and eighth house stuff, is like holding the paradox of like the discomfort, the pain, the shame, like that's coming up, and also like the power, right?
Mhm.
The unveiling, the voice, like your voice. Maybe you rediscover your true voice. Um, I was thinking about like I think one of the places where there's shame in the eighth house experience is because we're talking about like collective, like shared resources. Like, this is a huge thing, like the word shared, collective, like collaborative, like there's other people in the eighth house, um, versus the second house, right? Which is in many ways like the sister house, like the axis of like your values, okay, like your personal values, versus the eighth house, which is like shared values or unshared values, right? This is where we have to contest with the fact that like sometimes we do not share values. Um, but I do think that there's a lot of shame here with like the fear of asking for help, or the fear of like looking outside of the individual, again, like outside of the self and into the eyes of the other, and asking for help, like what an intimate thing, this like earth shattering. And I say this as a person that like has a hard time asking for help. And I'm sure, a lot of the listeners will relate to this. Um, we are trained to not need others. And there are things, many things that are currently happening that actually require our collective gathering. They require that we like stop and look at another person's eyes and ask for help and offer help too. Reciprocity, huge eighth house topic. Um, yeah. other people are here. Other people's stuff are here. It's not just your trauma either. It's like other people's trauma.
Yeah.
Collective.
Yeah, it's that point interpersonally when, well, first of all, I'm like madly in love with everything you just said. So just want to say that. But like interpersonally, when something in a relationship bumps up against like a very scared part of you, you know,
Mhm.
and it's so terrifying to tell the person like how afraid you feel. Um, it's just so afraid to trust that they're there for you, supporting you. And but like that we've had whenever you've been betrayed or you've that trust has been um unmet, you know, we just grow so many parts of us that are afraid to be vulnerable. And
Mhm.
like and at a collective level, just sending your tax money to a government that's not protecting you.
Yes. Oh my God, I was about to say this too. Yes, that's exactly right.
Like I feel
Why
like
am
when
I
I do,
paying
I
this?
have to be in like a dissociated state.
Yes, yes, yes. I this is so so big. Um, like why am I paying this government to use my money so that they can like send weapons,
Yeah.
you know, to massacre Palestinians and many others? Like, what the fuck? How do you how do you build trust after that? And how do you ask people because yeah, like paying your taxes is a relationship of trust. It's like I pay you this so that you can in turn take care of me and like, you know, maybe like fix the bridge that takes me from my home to my child's school so that, you know, the bridge will not collapse. You know, or whatever. I don't know, fix the
Hmm.
roads or like give me healthcare. Um, but we know that this is not it. And so I think, yeah, this is major eighth house territory. This like relationship of intimacy and trust with our supposed like governments. Yeah, this is broken.
Yeah. Oh, I'm feeling the weight of all this.
Yeah.
The debt system and even like the death system. Like,
Oof, yeah.
yeah.
Necropolitics. This is
Yeah.
a
Wow.
whole other episode that we can have about necropolitics and how certain populations seemingly deserve to live more than others.
Oh man. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And some lives are worth more than others. This is the information that we are receiving from.
This is the
Mhm. Yeah. Eighth house.
yeah.
Yeah.
And just bodies, people's bodies, how these bodies are treated,
Mhm.
uh, graves, undertakers. This is the eighth house material. How do we care for the dead?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Ugh, the topic of death is it's really like one of the oldest, and I would say like it's just the one that's been like the most consistent throughout like all the changes in the significations of the eighth house. And I think it's really important to remember like when these things were first crafted, like this language. Like people died a lot more. Like death was very visible in the ancient world. Like people were just like dying all the time. Like they would have lots of kids, children would die often. Um, there's lots of disease, people would just like not last as long as we do now. And if you think about our relationship to death now, it's been like really like sanitized, I think, by culture. Like we we don't seem to have like the proper rituals to process death and collective grief and trauma. Let's like, I think the pandemic was a huge unveiling, like a very eighth house unveiling where like, here are the bodies, you know, in the hospital.
Mhm.
They don't fit, they no longer fit in the hospital. These are all these bodies. And we had to like witness that collectively through our phones. And yet, and here again, no, going back to what we were talking about, this genocide that we are all witnessing through our phones. We see the bodies every day. We wake up, we see the bodies. And we don't know what to do with this. We just know like we're not supposed to be seeing these bodies, right? Um, this should be hidden. All this violence, all this death. It's very unsanitary to look at. We don't like it. We're not like trained to see it, but it's here and it's there. Most importantly, it's real. Um, yeah, I'm not really sure where I'm going with this, but yeah, I guess there's something about, I think, the hypocrisy um, of like what we should be seeing and what we should be doing versus like what's there,
Mhm.
what we see.
And there's that sense of it's like a the insertion. It's like an insertion into um which is why there's this awakening feeling to it because it's an interruption, it's a disruption into just business as usual
Right.
for us to see how fucked up
Mhm.
these shared systems are.
Yeah, and there's again like the topic of inheritance and debt. It's also like what we're leaving behind, right? The eighth house is like when we're no longer here, like our physical bodies, when we die, what inheritance are we leaving behind and what debt? Because our debt
Yeah.
continues. And, again, this is like literal debt, but of course, with the eighth house, we're talking very much about like metaphorical and psychological, trauma and all these things. Um, like the eighth house is so much about like what what remains, what remains after death.
Yeah.
Things, the objects, right? The houses, the properties, the pollution. I don't know. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, I have hope in the younger generations who have had no choice but to see and look at and talk about what for my generation was taboo. And
Mhm.
because it was taboo, it was ignored
Mhm.
and stuffed away. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like I think we're realizing that, these collective systems are not caring. It's not like people didn't know, but it's just so intense now that we have to come together to do it
Yes.
ourselves.
Mhm.
Um,
Hmm.
mhm. Thank you for going to these deep places with me.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Eighth house. I didn't know. Yeah, I wasn't sure where our conversation would like go, but I knew it was gonna go deep, as
Do
is
you
the eighth house.
do you want to share about your own eighth house or
Yeah, I would love to, and I actually have a kind of an eighth. I have a very eighth house personal anecdote from this year that I would like to share. So my eighth house, I have Gemini there. Um, and the only thing that I have there is Chiron. I don't have any of the personal planets. Um, yeah, one of the things we didn't talk about, I don't think necessarily explicitly, but there's this thing with the eighth house that is, again, like talking about visibility and this place being called the idol place, it does have to do with like its relationship to the ascendant, right? Like in astrology or in an astrological chart, everything begins with the ascendant, right? Like the ascendant is that like point of reference for life. It's a life-giving uh point in the chart. It's like the person, the self, the body, very embodied point. And when you think or look at like the relationship between the first house and the eighth house, you can see like there's no traditional relationship between the two houses, meaning there's no like trine, there's no sextile that's possible. Um, it's just like in the dark when your visibility is from the ascendant, if that makes sense. It's
yes.
like a big part of why it's considered to be a kind of quote dark house, because the ascendant or the self cannot see in this place. Like this place is hidden. We can see the seventh house, but we cannot see the eighth. There's like a weird angle. And so to enter the eighth house, there's also, I think, like the regular tools don't really work. It's like the key that you use to open all your doors is not necessarily going to work, I think. in the eighth house. Um, yeah. So I have a very packed first house, the ruler of my eighth house, which is Gemini. So the ruler of Gemini is in my first house. It's Mercury, and it's sitting right next to my ascendant in very tight conjunction. So I often think about this like, okay, so my ascendant cannot see the eighth house. Got it. But the ruler of my eighth house is right next to my ascendant, and it happens to be this one energy that is very good at moving through crafty places, right? um, Mercury, of course, being like the well-known planet of communication, like sort of moves very fast, can get in and out of places, can go down into the underworld and up. It's sort of like traversing realms and yeah, sort of rules also. So yeah, I think I have to thank Mercury a lot for my relationship to the eighth house. I think that's a way in for me. You know, I was saying like it's not always like
Mm.
easy, I think, to enter the eighth house, especially if you don't have like anything there. I mean, I do have Chiron, which is it's a big thing. Um, especially in the unshaming. Like I think Chiron is just must like you must have talked about Chiron quite a lot, I think, in this project. It's
Mhm.
like very fertile archetype to talk about shame. Anyway, that's my chart.
Yay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about how today I have Uranus and Scorpio in the eighth, and
Oh,
to the extent that what your placement there can tell you about death. Um, I've had now with Buddy 5 major deaths in my life, and they all happened where I woke up in the morning and the person was the being was alive, and I went to bed and they were not alive anymore. Like Uranus being sudden changes.
wow. Yeah.
Um, I'll probably die suddenly. Um, which that's okay. Not a bad way to die. But I feel like Chiron there um really can speak to your like your medicine cabinet is the eighth house cabinet.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Chiron being the master, I think, of so many things, including yeah, the dark arts.
Hmm. That totally would have been your class at Hogwarts.
Yes. Fingers crossed that it can still happen.
Come teach at my school. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
um, yeah, Chiron.
Yeah, so I'm curious if you have any thoughts around like um supporting or words for folks listening who have placements in the eighth. I'm like you, I don't necessarily get excited to jump in, especially if I don't know somebody.
Yeah.
Do you feel like eighth house is placements just there's like a proper timing to how the individual we each come to be able to talk about it, like there's
Yeah.
a timing, there's a divine timing to like when we're ready to walk in and hold the candle, and creep
Mhm.
around, go find out what's in there.
Yeah, I think like I I feel into it, but to be honest, like if the person has their sun, moon, like whatever in the eighth house, like this like a good chance that this person is actually ready to like cut the bullshit and just like let's get into it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
More than me, you know, because they've been living with that. So they're the experts, I think, in a way. But yeah, it's kind of like talking about someone's Pluto, like on the first date or on the first, encounter. It's like, it's a bit, it can be a bit much. Um, but yeah, I found that I do get like lots of people that have eighth house stuff, and they usually, yeah, they're kind of ready to go. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
they don't want me to sugarcoat things, and neither do I.
Yeah, I think because vulnerability is one of my signatures, I feel like a lot of my spaces are eighth house spaces,
Yeah.
where folks are excited to like, let's just go. Let's just get in there. Let's talk. Let's take our clothes off.
I love it.
Right. Because it's that unveiling, it's like the Anana taking off all her
Yeah.
jewels.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
a disrobing and a revealing.
Yeah, it's so necessary, I think, especially like if you think about it, like getting to the eighth house from the seventh house. Like
Mhm.
in the seventh house, like you might think you're ready to disrobe in this relationship, but it's in the eighth house where you really like put to the test, I think. That's
Yeah,
yeah.
completely. Like, do you still like me now? Do you still
Yeah.
like me now? Do you still like me now?
Yeah, like, do you still like me now that you know I'm a Nepo baby? Like
Maybe you didn't know. I have snakes coming out under my hat. Um,
yeah.
yeah, maybe you didn't know. Exactly. And man, as those relationships where you can just pass through those gates together,
Mhm.
move through the excitement, that the sensation of reveals and let it metabolize and still look each other in the eye and want to keep going. Like those are the treasures, and that's part of eighth house too, is like deep treasure is
Mhm.
those people that you just keep going down deeper with. Um,
Yeah.
and they keep seeing you and they're like, yeah, I'm still here for all of it.
Yeah.
That's a treasure.
That's a treasure. Yeah, that's trust. And yeah, I think trusting that like people can leave also, right?
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
not to bring this down, but like, we don't really control people. And I do think that that is also an eighth house kind of thing. Like that's quite uncomfortable. It's like the lack of control that we have over so many of these topics like death, inheritance, like sudden changes, including like these intimate relationships, like coming to terms with the fact that, you know, people leave and people die.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Fuck.
yeah. I mean, I feel like I spent the first 3 years with Matt in terror that he would be like, oh, wait, I made a terrible mistake and leave.
Mm.
And now I just live in terror for when he's going to die.
My God, yeah.
If it's not
Yeah,
one thing or another,
I
when
relate.
when you love, and it's just like
Yeah.
recommitting to like it being worth it because loving is so amazing.
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah. Huge.
And I feel like that's how the eighth house like circles us back to second house. It takes us back to life through the other end, is like
Hmm.
getting down to like how do we want to live here? How do we want to love each other? How do we want to care for each other? Do I want to do this alone or do we want to do it together? And just like so vulnerable.
Yeah.
So all of these interpersonal and collective relationships, it's like they're going to require us to keep healing
Hmm.
and repairing because we're going to bump up against the terror all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And all that, yeah, second house work, like getting very clear on what you want, your values, like all of that plays out in the eighth house too when you're confronted with the other. If you didn't clear those values in the second house, like that shit's gonna come up in the eighth house. Um, and I do think like maybe that's why there are gates there. It's like you can go down to the second, like you didn't get clear. Okay, go to
Go
the
back.
gate of Hades and go back.
Yeah. When you've got a value mismatch, you know, it's tricksy to feel really good about sharing everything with that person.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Hmm. Oh goodness. I'm wondering, how are you feeling? Do you have other stuff on your
And I'm gonna look at my notes really
I while
quickly.
you do that, I'm going to tell you how much I love seeing the deep blue coming in from your window. It's like evening light coming
Look
in.
at that.
Oh,
And there's this
a
mushroom
broom and a
that
mushroom.
it's very, yeah. The broom is, always there. And the mushroom was made by Nicole Fransco.
Oh,
And
yes.
yeah.
Oh,
Um, I guess I had like a personal story to tell
yeah,
you about the eighth
please.
house. I'll say it quickly. Like I do think this last year I've gotten to know my eighth house a lot more deeply, and just like the eighth house, like the significations of the eighth house have been very, very alive in my life this year, because I had so late last year I had a death in my family, right? Eighth house, but specifically it was the father of my partner. So it was
Mm.
someone else's family, like still my family, but through partnership. And so, like, we've been all this time kind of like navigating in the grief that comes from the death of a loved one. It was very sudden. And then something that came after this difficult loss is that this person left things for us, right? Which is This is like prime eighth house, right? Death, inheritance, in my case, through someone else, right? Through the
In-laws.
relationship, through in-laws, right? This like quote, other people's money, other people's assets, other people's belongings. And so this whole year we've been like in this process of like we basically like inherited a property that like we never even thought about. Like it was like what? Um and this year began, 2024, and like the idea is to sell this property, right? Which is another like very eighth house thing. Like you inherit this thing, like what do you do with it? With what is here, what remains after someone passes? It's like this thing, what do you want to do with it? Um, and so selling was the option. And at the beginning of the year, I was doing like my year ahead um predictions, I guess, for myself, like wondering, and I saw that Jupiter was going to move from Taurus to Gemini in May. So from my seventh house of relationships and partnerships into my eighth house of shared resources, death, etc. And I wrote on my journal, like, I wonder if once Gemini, I mean, once Jupiter moves into Gemini, like, we're going to sell this house in May. And of course, this is exactly what happened. And so this is like, I wanted to share this because this is kind of like real time astrology, right? Like, I don't have like major planets in the eighth house, but I am having a major transit right now, a major like Jupiter transit through my eighth house. I mean, we all have Jupiter transiting somewhere. But yeah, like one of the sort of textbook significations of Jupiter transiting eighth house on the positive side is this like sort of windfall
Yeah, bonus.
bonus, like you were not expecting it, but also it's like the exchange for it, right? Like it's tied to the topics of this house, it's tied to loss. Like that's,
Mm.
there's a payment for it. There's a coin in the mouth. And yeah, I just thought that that was an interesting sort of eighth house thing to share with people because it's both like kind of a positive thing and also like extremely negative, and like I hold both of them, together. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And it also points to the kind of uh not easily talk aboutable aspects of the eighth house, because those are hard things to chat about, with someone that you aren't super close to. Those are not the types of things that, your coworkers might know is going on.
Yeah,
Eighth house
exactly.
things are often like that. Like they're huge, and
Mhm.
yet it feels weird to talk about them.
Yeah, it's very hidden. Yeah, it's like, man, the eighth house in the swamp. It's the monster like swimming underneath that like very still water that you can see at the top, but there's like all this life underneath. It's kind of like that, or like a volcano also, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, cheers to the spaces where we can go swimming.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you for going here with me. Um, we have always delighted in uncomfortable, creepy, crawly topics together. You are a treasure to me that way. Um, yeah, I'd love for you to share with listeners how they can connect with you.
Well, probably Instagram is like I'm pretty active there. I'm doing a class that starts in 2 weeks, so probably won't like this will air, I think, after my class starts. But yeah, it's a class about kind of eighth house topics. It's called Chthonic as fuck. Um, and it's all about like unearthing myths related to monstrosity and underworld stuff, sacred rage, very eighth house. So yeah, if you're listening to this and the class already started, I have a feeling I'm going to continue to work with these topics. So just like come join me on my Instagram or my Substack, and we can keep talking about it. I also do consultations one-on-one. You can find that on my Instagram or my website. And I am doing a retreat during Gemini season, actually. So my eighth house is going to be activated by the sun. I'm doing an astrology retreat with our friend Megan Fry. We did one last year in Greece and it was amazing. So astrology, tarot, all the things that we love, plus beach and amazing food, yoga, relaxation, joy, fun.
Oh my
So
God.
that's at the end of May. So we're doing 2 sessions. We're doing a new moon session, more quiet, contemplative time, like new moon in Gemini. And then we're doing a second session after that, which is going to be the full moon session, full moon in Sag, different vibe, super wild, very like centaur.
Yes. Yes. The decadence, the photos y'all had last year, this looked so decadent. The richness of the place.
Yeah, we found a really great place. It's kind of a hidden gem. Like, I don't know if it's cliche to say these things probably, but it's kind of in an area of Greece that's not as touristy. It's very quiet. Yeah, so you can find a lot of time to relax and contemplate the depths. Yeah.
So excited that y'all are doing that again.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing us together, Britton. I don't know. I guess I would not have friends if it wasn't for you. I'm sure you'll talk about this like probably in the intro, but yeah, like I met Megan Fry and like so many other people through your containers. And well, yeah.
My eighth house spaces. Oh, yep. Y'all were 13th readers together for the Magician's Table 2022.
Yes.
And co-facilitators on my first iteration of Cave Space.
That's right. Yeah.
And the next year, y'all participated as well when I had that huge group.
Yeah. We've been in it.
We've been in it. Thank you for saying yes once again.
Oh my God, my pleasure. I love this.
Well. That was a profound conversation. Thank you, Mariola. Thank you, Eighth House. And I'm hearing it, so I'll say it. Thank you, Shame. You, Shame, are also part of the human experience. Listeners, I hope you will connect with Mariola either through Instagram or by booking a reading or joining Mariola in one of her containers. It's not too late to get into Chthonic AF. For those of y'all who are enjoying the Unshaming the Houses project, I would love it if you would leave a review or a rating when you leave here today. Let other people know that you love moon to moon, that it's worth their time. Like, give it a shot, like try it out, experiment. Often we humans don't want to give things a try unless we see evidence from other human beings that it's a cool way to spend your time. So it really means a lot. It really matters. Your voice matters. Your testimonial matters. Your rating matters. So if you like moon to moon and you find that it's a supportive place for you to go, and you think that the content here is helpful in this business of humaning, please take a moment right now to write a review and to rate the podcast. Thank you so much for that. All right, y'all. I'm wishing you a beautiful, deep drop in here. If you're listening close to this release, I'm releasing this at the new moon in Scorpio, which happens to fall this year right at the cross quarter between fall equinox and winter solstice, a day often known as Samhain, at a time when it is getting quite dark outside here in the northern hemisphere, and the veils between worlds are more thin, we say. There's opportunity to feel the support, to feel the love, to feel the celebrations, the witnessing of not just the recently dead, but the deep rivers. The rivers, these lines, these networks of support across timelines and dimensions from the other side. Wishing you beautiful grief, if grief is what is present for you. May it alchemize, and may it support you with any rest that you're craving right now. Thank you. And I will see you at the next one. Cheers.